10 of the worst matches in WCW's dying days. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Number 10. Major Guns vs Miss Hancock, New Blood Rising. One of the fundamental flaws of the final years of WCW was that they would devote TV time and pay-per-view time to individuals who couldn't have a remotely passable match. At the New Blood Rising pay-per-view, WCW booked Major Guns to take on Miss Hancock in a match titled Mud Rip Off the Clothes match, and it was truly abysmal. The in-ring action was receiving audible laughs from the crowd, and for the 6-minute duration, Mark Madden on commentary was delivering sexist lines that have aged like milk. This was the WCW's version of the bra and panties match, yet this was so poorly executed that it was hardly a surprise that this would be one of the final times a match of this nature would be booked before WCW closed its doors forever. Number 9. David Flair vs Kimberly Paige, Mayhem 99. David Flair was given endless pushes in the final years of WCW, and most of them just fell flat. Flair wasn't good enough in the ring, and most of his character work was incredibly poor. Despite these common criticisms that were prominent at the time, Flair would be booked in numerous pay-per-view matches, including at the Mayhem 1999 pay-per-view where he was booked to wrestle non-wrestler Kimberly Paige. The match began with Paige getting on her knees, and it looked like Flair was going to hit her with his dreaded crowbar. Paige would then pretend to seduce Flair before hitting him with a foreign object and then hitting him with a low blow. The match would then see Paige delivering the worst kicks imaginable as the crowd heavily booed at the horror of what was unfolding. Eventually, Cannon, DDP, and Arn Anderson interfered in the match, and the match would unceremoniously end in a no contest. This was an angle rather than a pay-per-view match, and this belonged on Nitro or even Thunder. Number 8. Mike Awesome vs Vampiro, Halloween Havoc 2000. On paper, a match between Mike Awesome and Vampiro on pay-per-view should have been a decent matchup. However, their pay-per-view encounter at the 2000 Halloween Havoc pay-per-view was one of the worst matches of the calendar year. Now, it's worth pointing out that this match was a standard match, and it was never disclosed that the match was a no DQ or no countout encounter. Obviously, WCW completely ignored this rule, and the two talented wrestlers did whatever they wanted in the ring, and the WCW commentary team was baffled as to what was even happening. One of the notable spots in the match saw Awesome and Vampiro break kayfabe and attack a fan. Also during the match, the two began to brawl with a microphone stand that was found in the crowd, which meant that WCW were basically admitting that they were using live mics in the crowd to amplify the sound. The match showcased everything that was wrong with WCW at the time. Nothing made sense and nothing seemed to matter. Number 7. Rick Steiner vs Sting, Great American Bash 99. One of the top matches on the Great American Bash card in 1999 was Rick Steiner vs Sting. They were colliding in a Falls Count Anywhere match, and the match was supposed to be in a serious tone, yet it resulted in one of the funniest matches in pro wrestling history. The action at first was passable, yet when the two went to the backstage area, everything just fell apart. The match featured interference from the likes of Scott Steiner and Tank Abbott, and it completely went off the rails when Sting was attacked by rabid dogs. Yeah, that's right, rabid dogs. The situation turned comical when it was made apparent that Sting was holding a rag on his hand in order for the dogs to safely bite him. It looked appalling and once again made WCW and its talent look like complete amateurs. Number 6. Jeff Jarrett vs Sid vs Scott Steiner vs Animal, Sin 2001. One of WCW's final pay-per-view offerings was titled Sin, and the pay-per-view saw a main event that featured a truly terrifying injury. The match saw Scott Steiner take on Sid and Jeff Jarrett and a fourth mystery man that would eventually be revealed as Road Warrior Animal. This lackluster reveal aside, it was the injury that was the talking point of the match. Sid, who never ascended up to the ropes, decided to leap off the turnbuckle, and when he landed, his leg literally snapped. It was incredibly gruesome, and it led to mass panic about Sid's well-being. The match was somehow able to come to its natural conclusion, yet the consequences would be dire. Sid would reveal that he was in essence forced to deliver the move, and he subsequently sued WCW and lost his case. Sid would eventually wrestle again following the incident, yet his time as a top name in the wrestling industry was officially done. Number 5. Oklahoma vs Medusa, Sold Out 2000. By the time WCW arrived at Sold Out 2000, the WCW Cruiserweight title meant very little. The current champion was Medusa, and she would defend the title against Oklahoma. Oklahoma was a former WWE writer, Ed Ferrara, doing a tasteless impression of Jim Ross, and WCW, specifically Vince Russo, thought that this was so funny that he devoted endless amounts of TV and pay-per-view time to the character. Even though the match was thankfully short, the match was a spit in the face to talents such as Eddie Guerrero, Chris Jericho, and Rey Mysterio, who had put in hard work to make the Cruiserweight title one of the most exciting titles in pro wrestling. The match saw Medusa, who was a credible pro wrestler, struggle to get the better of the former WWE writer, and even the commentary team were addressing how much the Cruiserweight division had fallen. The finish of the match saw Oklahoma get the win after performing what looked like a low blow and a roll-up. The lineage of a once beloved Cruiserweight title would never be the same ever again. Number 4, Sting vs Vampiro, Great American Bash 2000. The idea behind the infamous rivalry between Sting and Vampiro in 2000 was for Sting to pass the torch to Vampiro. The two had similar characters, yet WCW butchered the execution of the storyline, and the story ended up destroying Vampiro's popularity. The two would face off in a Human Torch match at the Great American Bash event, and to win the match, a wrestler had to be set on fire. Vampiro would win the match by setting the icon on fire before throwing him off the top of the cage. This could have been a special moment, yet the acting and delivery was shockingly bad, and it once again made WCW look like they had no clue what they were doing. One of the reasons why the match was heavily criticized was that when Sting was thrown off from the cage, the camera cut to the floor, and it was obvious that Sting, or rather Sting's stunt double, had fallen into the biggest crash mat imaginable. The crowd was utter silent as the WCW production team sprayed fire extinguishers on Sting, and the commentary team were lost as to what to say as they were offering comical lines such as, "They're using the fire extinguisher to keep Sting cool." Number 3, Bret Hart vs Goldberg, Starrcade 99. A Starrcade was WCW's signature event, and for the 1999 incarnation of the pay-per-view, WCW managed to book a match that fans genuinely wanted to see. Bret Hart would defend the world title against Goldberg, and due to this being WCW, they couldn't just book him to have a great main event match. The in-ring action was awkward, and this was the dreaded match in which Hart was kicked in the skull by Goldberg, which contributed to the end of his pro wrestling career. The end of the match saw Roddy Piper come down to the ring to officiate, and as Hart locked in the sharpshooter, Piper rang for the bell. WCW had once again replicated the Montreal Screwjob as the fans groaned in unison. This was insanely lazy from WCW, and it was unfathomable how they believed their biggest show of the year could go off the air in a lifeless way. Number 2, Buff Bagwell vs Kenyon, New Blood Rising. During Vince Russo's time as head of writer for WCW, he had bizarre infatuation with gimmick matches that nobody wanted to see. At the New Blood Rising pay-per-view in 2000, Russo booked Buff Bagwell to take on Kenyon, and the match just so happened to have Judy Bagwell on a forklift on the outside of the ring. If Kenyon won, Judy would become his new valet, whereas if Bagwell won, his mother would be set free. This match was initially advertised as a Judy Bagwell on a pole match, and it goes without saying that it would have been virtually impossible to attach poor Judy to a pole. The match ended up being horrendously executed, as it was just so confusing as to why Judy was even on a forklift. Kenyon would claim that it was due to her size, which was another poor attempt at comedy. But after a 6-minute bore fest, Bagwell managed to pick up the win, ending one of the most ridiculous matches ever seen on pay-per-view. And number 1, Hulk Hogan vs Jeff Jarrett, Bash at the Beach 2000. Perhaps the most infamous match of the final years of WCW took place at the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view in 2000. Jeff Jarrett would defend his world title against Hulk Hogan, which on the surface was a huge match for the company, yet backstage politics as well as incompetent booking led to the match being a colossal failure. Due to Vince Russo and Hogan being unable to reach an agreement on the finish, Russo decided to book Jarrett to lay down for Hogan, allowing Hogan to win the world title. This would then lead to a storyline in which fans became aware of Hogan's backstage power. Following Hogan's victory, he would cut a promo where he declared, "Is this your idea, Russo? That's why this company is in the damn shape it's in, because of bullshit like this." However, this was when things went off the rails as Russo cut an unscripted promo which berated Hogan, and Hogan had no idea that Russo was about to bury him live on pay-per-view. This led to Hogan departing WCW and filing a defamation of character lawsuit against Russo. During this entire debacle, Russo would announce that Jeff Jarrett would take on Booker T in the main event of the show, and the show would go off the air with a deserving Booker T as world champion. There you have it, folks, 10 of the worst matches in WCW's dying days. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.